Thank you for joining, everyone. We'll begin momentarily.
Hey everyone. Yeah.
Not just yet.
While we're
I'm gonna do my little introduction, but if you have something you want to say before I do my house.
just while Stephanie is doing her introduction, yeah, I'd love to see where people are located. Can
Oh,
add that in
cool.
the chat. That's great.
Nice.
All right, but back to you.
Okay, I'm gonna give people another couple minutes just to log in. It looks like people are still logging in, and we'll get started right at noon. Wow, Spain. That's nice. Ohio and Arizona are nice too. Wow. Lots of people from all over the world. That's so cool. Well, thank you for joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I see people from all over the world. My name's Stephanie Kushner. I am part of the business development team here at TPGI, and we are going to have our webinar today, How to Prepare for Accessibility Testing, Part 1, with Aaron Farber. I have a few housekeeping items I'm going to go through quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Aaron. This session is being recorded, and we will email everyone the recording after the event. We have captions available, so feel free to use them as needed. We will have time for live Q&A, but please try to use the Q&A box. And we'll answer as many of the questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Sometimes we miss the question if they're in the chat, so try to use the Q&A box. Lastly, I'd like to mention if anyone needs any accessibility support, training, usability testing, I'll be sending out an email with a link to schedule a time to speak with one of our experts after the webinar. And with that, I will let Aaron get started and provide an introduction to himself, although I'm thinking many of you already know him. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, good morning or good day, everyone. Let me 1 second here. So my name is Aaron Farber. I'm a platform consultant here at TPGI. In this role, I train organizations to plan and execute every aspect of their accessibility program. Being deliberate in how you plan out your accessibility program is, really fundamental to its success and ensuring everyone on your team understands their role. So a little bit about my own background before we kind of get started really here. I've worked on accessibility at all scales of organizations. So prior to working at TPGI, I had my own kind of like small accessibility shop working with small businesses, the kind that would use WordPress or Shopify. And so I'd audit their site and handle all of the development for them. And then now here at TPGI, I started as an accessibility engineer, which is primarily delivering WCAG audits. Really our bread and butter here at TPGI. And then I was embedded with a very large tech company for a year, helping them create an accessibility program really from the ground up. And now here at TPGI, I'm in a role kind of, again, like helping customers understand how to use ARC to suit their accessibility program. So today, as Stephanie said, you are free to add your questions at any time. For most questions, I mean, I think I'll probably save them until the end. but I'll try to keep an eye on the chat because we do sometimes have excellent questions as the chat is going. So with that said, I am going to share my screen and let's get this really going. Okay. How to prepare for accessibility testing. I'm really excited about today's topic because, I find there's so many different checklists and training programs about testing, actual specific accessibility guidelines, and not enough thought is spent on the actual preparation stage, creating an accessibility review. Okay. So to discuss here our overview, we have we'll do an overview, and accessibility standards, our environment, grouping guidelines, selecting a representative sample, and then instructions for testers. And at the end, I will be covering the templates, which I'll be providing after to attendees. So I'll be providing a test plan template, as well as a spreadsheet to record your manual testing results. So these are great halves, great things to get coming out of this, and they're ready to use for your organization. So one thing I want to keep, just kind of like say at the start here is, the Accessibility Resource Center, ARC, it contains the tools and resources for every aspect of managing an accessibility program. However, today, don't focus on the product, focus on the vision. I'm not selling a product, I'm selling a vision, and ARC provides all the tools and resources for that vision. But by the same token, it is possible to, cobble together these resources from different things online. So, keep that in mind. Now, let's go. Okay, so first, let's kind of lay out the ARC landscape, and this very much aligns with the tools that your organization will, in a sense, have to have. First, there's provider. ARC Provider allows you to plan, create, and manage accessibility reviews. It's ideal for organizations which do a lot of accessibility reviews. They have a lot of applications, or they are an accessibility vendor, right? Like performing reviews for organizations that contract with them. Next, there is ARC Capture. That is our guided testing tool, which allows you to perform manual and automated accessibility reviews. Yes, Capture combines manual testing with automated scans. And lastly, there is ARC Monitoring. That is to run automated scans between manual reviews. Remember, only through manual testing is the only way to have full WCAG success, to have full WCAG coverage. However, monitoring is helpful for understanding, the changes in between those audits and getting immediate feedback. Okay, so first of all, here we see a screenshot of engagement details from within the provider, ARC Provider. So your first step is to set a status and expected delivery date. To do that, you'll have to calculate the number of hours needed for the audit and consider a schedule for performing the audit. Now, calculating the number of hours is something that you're going to get better at over time. And we'll talk about that more as we get towards the end of this webinar of how to calculate the number of hours. And we want to be realistic, right? It's important that, we set these realistic delivery dates and set aside time to practice and perform that audit. Now, your next step after you set a date and you've decided, to work on a particular application is to select an accessibility standard. So WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, is the prevailing standard for online accessibility that the legal and technology communities have settled upon, right? If a court finds a site to be inaccessible, let's say, the remedy is to conform to WCAG. So WCAG 2.0, the version was published in December 2008. they published a new version 2.1 in 2018, and 2.2 was just published this month or last month, actually. Wow, time's flying, in October 2023. So each version, I should say, of WCAG builds upon previous versions. So in other words, to pass, you have to pass 2.0 in order to pass 2.1. You have to pass 2.1 in order to pass 2.2. And we see a table here showing the number of success criteria. In 2.0, it was 38. 2.1, it was 50. And 2.2 is now 57 WCAG success criteria. With that said, I think, ultimately, WCAG hasn't changed that much over time. These new additional success criteria are mainly to clarify ambiguities in the original 2.0 success criteria. So to kind of understand those different levels, WCAG, to make an application accessible, could require, either significant changes to the site's code base, number one, or number two, changes to a site's visual appearance. So level A means that it does not require one or two. Level AA means it requires one or two. And level AAA means that it requires one and two. So most organizations audit their applications against level AA. In fact, in my years here at TPGI, I do not know of TPGI ever performing an audit at the AAA level. So kind of we talked about the levels of conformance in terms of, technical resources and on that level. Now let's talk about it on human level. So level A ensures the most basic level of access for disabled people. It does not provide an equivalent user experience. Level AA ensures disabled people do not encounter significant barriers. It provides a mostly equivalent user experience. And level AAA enhances the user experience for disabled people. It ensures accommodation for people who have multiple disabilities. Next is the rules engine. And, question mark, rules engine, question mark. Well, so here in the screenshot, we see of engagement details, we see the analytics engine is Arc Rules. That is TPGI's in-house exclusive Arc Rules engine, which combines both manual and automated tests. So Arc Rules, think about this, it breaks down WCAG and all of these 50 or 57 WCAG success criteria into smaller discrete tests. So, for example, a test that might be 1.1.1 non-text content, the first WCAG success criteria. In Arc Rules Engine, that's broken down into a rule for traditional HTML images, a rule regarding Canvas elements. Canvas is a element that is often used to generate like highly interactive content online, like maps and games and stuff like that. And then so Arc Rules, again, it's breaking it down into these smaller discrete tests. And what that does is it enables testers with less accessibility experience to reliably carry out these tests. And really, that's something that's a very difficult thing to do on your own, like of taking these success criteria and breaking them down into individual rules. That is something that, again, Arc Rules does. When I was embedded with a large tech company, that was one of the first actions they undertook when creating an accessibility program, is that they wanted to come up with a list of rules of individual tests that teams could apply, and then they could have instructions and remediation guidance built for just those rules. However, nonetheless, it is possible to review by guideline. So ARC provides manual testing procedures for every WCAG success criteria. So in ARC's knowledge base, which is, we provide our manual testing procedures for every WCAG success criteria, as I said, including with well, they're not draft anymore, they're published 2.2 success criteria. And with these resources, you can replicate TPGI's internal testing processes. However, it's worth noting that evaluating by rule involves more nuance an intern testing experience, right? Now, I do want to make one kind of editorial note here, is that accessibility is not subjective. Accessibility is objective. Multiple testers should reach the same outcome when performing these manual testing procedures. Now, before I go forward, I realize that I left out a slide here. I will include it in the slides when they are sent out afterwards, but it covers your environment, the environment in which you are evaluating this application. By default, TPGI, when we perform manual testing, our browser combinations are JAWS and Chrome, and also NVDA and Firefox, or NVDA and Chrome. JAWS is the most popular primary desktop screen reader. And I speak from my own anecdotal experience, yes, that any person that I know that relies on a screen reader that is professionally employed mainly uses JAWS for their work. So using JAWS is the best testing tool to use in terms of to replicate the actual experience by screen reader users. NVDA, however, is free, and it is quite getting increasingly similar to JAWS. And the last note I'll have is that commonly I see developers go about using VoiceOver on their MacBook. VoiceOver on MacBook is used by is the primary desktop screen reader for, I believe, less than 2% of screen reader users. These numbers are from a non-scientific survey performed by WebAIM. So VoiceOver is not really analogous to these, and VoiceOver for the phone is very different than the VoiceOver on MacBook. So again, using VoiceOver to evaluate an application is not really analogous to the screen reader experience. With that said, JAWS is very robust. So probably anything that you would have an issue with using JAWS would also be an issue on VoiceOver. However, using VoiceOver, you're probably going to find a lot more issues than a lot more unusual announcements than you would using JAWS. So moving on. One great thing to do at the start of your audit is to group related accessibility guidelines. So over this first half of 2023, some of you may have attended, we did an Understand, Test, Solve webinar series where each month we did a webinar on one of these accessibility topics. Afterwards, I believe in the email following this session, we'll share those resources so you can go back and watch those past webinars. So here, the grouping of related accessibility guidelines, we have keyboard and focus, number 1. Number 2, color contrast and use of color. 3, images and graphical elements. 4, page structure and navigation. 5, interactive elements and ARIA. And 6, responsive design. And here we see a screenshot from within Art Capture, our guided testing tool. And we see it by topic, and it's broken down even more so than these 6 topics. We break down these 6 topics into, I think, about 18 different topics in Capture, but the same ideas apply. Now, why do we group related accessibility guidelines? Well, because it enables us to delegate more work to more people. And testing for some of these different guidelines only requires a specific skill set. So again, it allows more people to get involved. Moreover, it saves us time. When you are actually just numerically going through the WCAG success criteria, like 1.1.1 to 1.1.2 to there's a level of inefficiency because you're switching from different testing approaches. Like 1 second you're using a screen reader, and then the next you're using, evaluating color contrast. So grouping by related guidelines allows you to just focus on one topic at a time, cover multiple success criteria. So for example, keyboard and focus. Here's the WCAG success criteria mapped to the keyboard and focus grouping. 2.11 keyboard, 2.12 no keyboard trap, 2.14 character key shortcuts, 2.41 bypass blocks, 2.43 focus order, and 2.47 focus visible. So to describe these quickly, keyboard is simply just that an activity can be, that an element on the page is operable via keyboard. Any action you can do within a mouse, right? You should generally be able, or touch, you should generally be able to do with keyboard. No keyboard trap is that one can tab through the site without getting the keyboard stuck in a particular place on the site. So you'll see this sometimes, that there may be like a form field where once the text, the keyboard is set within that form field, you can't move it elsewhere. Character key shortcuts. Wow, that's one I see less frequently nowadays. But that is when websites use a single character key to do a site action. The correct move is to have a modifier key like Shift or Alt also connected to that. Character key shortcuts interfere with assistive technologies, existing keyboard commands. Bypass blocks. That refers to the ability to skip repeated blocks of content. Yes, the skip link, where you skip the navigation to set focus directly to the main content. Focus order is the order of focusable elements on the page. That is interactive elements generally that you can tab onto. And focus visible is when you tab onto these elements, do they have a visual focus indicator? Can you tell what element on the page currently has keyboard focus, currently open to keyboard interactions? So let's think about this issue topic, keyboard and focus. It does not require a programming background, right? You're simply using your keyboard to navigate through the site. You're not opening developer tools. You're not reviewing the code. You're just looking, and then if you're looking through the site to see what functionalities must be accessible via keyboard. However, to test keyboard and focus, one must have the ability to see the page to evaluate whether controls have visible focus indicators. And moreover, to understand what elements on the page should have keyboard interactivity. Next, we have color contrast. And I'm not going to go through all of the success criteria for each issue topic just for the sake of time. But I'll add them to the slides. So color contrast, they'll be available in the slides. So color contrast, 1.41 use of color, 1.413 content on hover or focus, 1.43 contrast minimum, and 1.411 non-text contrast. So once again, testing color contrast does not require a technical background. It does not require you really to open up developer tools or to interact with the code. You can simply use TPGI's color contrast analyzer to compare pixels on your screen. Yes, as well as ARC monitoring and our automated tools, which will compare the CSS values, that is the color values explicitly set by authors. Now, after you've grouped the related accessibility guidelines, and again, think about this in practice, that let's say you have a small organization. You may say to the marketing person that is presumably not a developer, right? Hey, I want them to, and I see someone raise their hand. I'm going to see. Okay, that's a good question. I'll come back to it. Why do I include 1.413 in color and contrast groups, content on hover or focus? Because I assume to do the color contrast that you have the ability to use a mouse and can trigger hover interactions. That's why. And it's the same skill set. Content on hover or focus doesn't require a technical background. It's a valid question though, Patrick. Thank you. I knew someone was going to ask that and catch on to that. I was like, well, that'd be funny. So, all right, move on. Select a representative sample. It's rarely feasible or logical to evaluate every page or widget. So that's for the sake of time. Now, next, therefore, you have to select a representative sample. So a representative sample, we'll talk more about how to select one, but one good place to start is just consider the component library used on your site. So most big organizations, I think, kind of do component-based development nowadays. So review the list of components you have internally, and just look through your sites for instances of those components. Next, how to select a representative sample. Well, consider the website structure and purpose. Include a range of content types, videos, forms, etc. Select the template components, that is like the navigation bar and footer, as well as page-specific content such as forms. Consider the high visibility on high traffic user journeys. Each sample should be around the same size and level of effort to test. That's really a pro tip. I want to talk more about that, is that when you have samples that are the same, around the same size and level of effort to test, it allows you to manage your accessibility program more easily. You can make determinations about how long audits will take, and you can set realistic, delivery dates. And of course, this is something that TPGI has definitely got better at over time. I know that it's interesting because one nice thing about my job is getting to look at things at kind of an aerial level, and I see the fluctuation, the variability in how long components take. That's decreased over time as we've gotten better at scoping. So, Meg, I see a question here. Yes, you do understand correctly that the recommendation is to keep accessibility issues and report by groups like Keyboard and others, because again, it just allows you to delegate work more easily and just follow, track your and save time not having to switch between different testing approaches. One other thing I'll say with selecting a representative sample, when you're determining what to audit, if you think of a sample as having more accessibility issues or severe ones, that might be one you want to just include to ensure that those issues are reported and that they're kind of addressed. Okay. So here we have in the application, we have a screenshot of the tpgi.com homepage. Okay. So the number one job of a test plan is to break an application into a set of samples. So here we see that the primary navigation is a single component. The secondary navigation with the flyout menus is another component. And then we have, the hero section, which is a third component. Now, for components, I want to say here is that for each component, it's implied that it is to be tested at all responsive breakpoints. If the component is large or its mobile layout is significantly different, break the component into multiple components. So here we see O1 navigation desktop layout. We see the TPGI homepage here has, a navigation bar with expandable flyout menus. And then we see O2 navigation mobile layout. We see that at mobile layout, yes, the navigation becomes a hamburger menu with this kind of like accordion tabs. So it's a very different layout. So therefore, we've broken it up into separate components. But again, when you list a component in your test plan, it is implied that it is at all responsive breakpoints, unless explicitly stated otherwise. So when we define a component, for each component, provide a name, an ID, a number for the component. I like to supply both, a screenshot, steps to reach the component, and the steps to reach the component are especially important if it is, deeper into a user journey where you have to do more, more actions in order to trigger that content to appear. Moreover, it's, you don't know who's going to be performing that audit necessarily. Like I think about like a big organization, like some product team is going to provide that to your accessibility or QA team, which is unfamiliar with that product. So the steps to reach component is very important. Next, what's included or not included in the component? Yes, it's important that you agree upon what is in scope for each component, and it saves work and a lot of, headaches in terms of determining whose responsibility or where to find the results for a particular, part of the site. Next, include an estimated level of effort. And lastly, a user flow. So the user flow is simply that within automated monitoring, within Arc, we map each component to a particular user flow, and that helps facilitate automated monitoring. Because with Arc, we can create scripts which navigate through your site and evaluate the site, as over the course of that navigation. So here we see an example of a component from our test plan. So it says O2 navigation header. So there's our ID, O2, and the navigation header, the name. We say the site. The user flow is template components. I know that I'm going to create a monitoring dashboard to track that from in between my manual audits of the site. Then we have includes all content within the navigation, including flyout menus, add desktop with. Excludes all content outside the navigation region, does not include the mobile layout. That layout is tested in O3 navigation menu responsive. Next, we have resources, expandable, collapsible widgets. So one note here about resources. When a component contains an established design pattern, it is recommended to provide a link to an accessible example of that design pattern. That helps testers be aware of the accessibility expectations for that component. So within Arc, we provide a library of different UI patterns. It's, from, yes, expandable, collapsible widgets to progress bars to auto-completes, all of those things. So you can provide links to Arc, and it saves so that your testers can understand, again, like, what's the goal here? And they can kind of compare the subtle differences between things. It's really helpful. Now, outside of Arc, of course, I'm open-minded here, right? Is the ARIA Authoring Practices Guide. That is a free resource online that contains accessible examples of a large number of design patterns. So that's, if you don't have an Arc subscription, that's a great thing to link to in your test plan. So here we see screenshots, figure 1, navigation header at desktop width. And then we see figure 2, expandable flyout menus, and we see that are expanded here. And I like doing these 2 screenshots because, again, it just helps be sure that testers understand exactly what's in scope here. That like, oh, okay, like the navigation header, like I'm going to evaluate the flyout menu. So we don't have a separate component for that. One other thing that I will note here is that, hey, there's no steps to reach the application. Why is there not? Well, because we know how to reach the application. Like, use common sense. Like, you don't have to put includes, excludes, and steps to reach if it is clear. However, again, for more complex applications, you'll definitely want to provide that kind of information. Next, when we are doing a manual audit, the first component that we create is common issues. You notice that the previous one started at O2 navigation header? Yes, common issues or global issues apply to the entire site. A common issues component saves time. You don't have to flag the same issues multiple times. And while it's not always be possible, the components should be organized based on their importance to the application. So an example of common issues would be, hey, all the pages on the site have the same page title, or the site globally has, mostly does not have a visible focused indicator. Most elements, when they're tabbed onto, there's no way to tell that that element's focused. Or, the page has a problematic meta element, so it could be the page could have markup, which is restricting zooming or scaling of the application. Generally, at TPGI, when we do common issues, there's a little bit of a huddle amongst engineers of like, well, what's a common issue? And again, this is a really critical one to do because it saves you a lot of time when performing the audit. Next, as I said, pro tip, select components which are about the same size. And when a component contains a particular design pattern, provide a reference. Now, let's make it accessible. Here's the call to action slide. But before we get into questions, I want to review the giveaway items that are associated with this webinar. So let's take a look. I'm actually going to stop sharing my slide deck right now. And I'm going to, I hate doing this part where I have to look around. So here we go. So here is the online product accessibility template. So this will be sharing afterwards. When we set up, audits with clients, or we set up monitoring, this is one of the first activities that we do with clients, is that we do this scoping activity, really going through this test plan. So let's kind of go through it briefly together and familiarize you with this document. So I'm scrolling down the document, and here throughout the document, we have these blue shaded portions that start with the heading pro tip. And these are guides on how to use this test plan to, just notes on how to use the test plan. If you were using this test plan and sharing it externally, like outside of your accessibility testing team, you may wish to remove those pro tips. Those are like for your internal use. As you go through this test plan, we have these yellow shaded portions, which are also surrounded by, what are those called? Carets. And those represent portions that they're like placeholders. They're things that you would fill in yourselves. So the purpose to this test plan is to organize your manual and automated testing, and again, provide examples of how to go about this work yourself. So first, we have the accessibility standard that we're using, the testing tools. When we say testing tools, these are the tools that we expect testers to have on their machine. Manual, ARC Toolkit, and Color Contrast Analyzer. Those are both free tools available to anyone. And you see we provide links here to download them. Automated, this is ARC Monitoring. ARC has multiple subscription tiers, including a free tier. So you can go about monitoring there. And however, the knowledge base is included in all paid subscription tiers. Moving on, here we have information about testing with assistive technologies. Now, one note, I got to do like kind of like some self promo, right? I mentioned earlier, we have the Understand Test Solve webinar series. In that webinar series, I cover in multiple of those webinars how to configure a screen reader for accessibility testing. So that I recommend consuming that content. It'll be really helpful to you when setting it up. If you're not a daily or regular screen reader user. And you see it's reiterating some of the information I told you already about MacBook and VoiceOver. Moving on, we have now with that said, we have using the manual accessibility review workbook. I have a little alert here about it. As I noted earlier, the best way to perform manual accessibility reviews is using ARC Capture, because it breaks down the WCAG success criteria into individual rules, allowing people with less experience in accessibility to reliably carry out testing. Nonetheless, you can also audit by WCAG success criteria. That's how the manual accessibility review workbook works. Okay, moving on here. We have a section here about organizing automated testing. So generally that's going to be either page level or component level. So if you're doing page level analysis, that's generally for a website, something that contains a lot of static information and limited user interaction is required to trigger content to appear. In ARC, we can do user flows, and that's for testing deeper into user journeys, content that is dynamically, requires user action to appear. Next, one thing that's really important to put in your test plan, oh man, can I tell you how helpful this is for TPGI, is test credentials. Put the test credentials to access the application. So that may be to access the VPN or the UAT environment, or to log into the application. So those test credentials are great to have here in this document, because again, you never know who's going to be looking at this application. Next, moving on here, we have information about selecting a representative sample. The link here, we say a sample of web pages and web pages states that is representative of the target website to be evaluated. The purpose of this selection is to ensure that the evaluation results reflect the accessibility performance of the website with reasonable confidence. Thank you, W3C. So this link provides a link to W3C on how to select a representative sample if you want more information. As well as we have a blog. We wrote a blog about it. Next, we have another section here about doing domain scan monitoring, that is evaluating full page using ARC monitoring. And so here, you know, I always recommend providing like a list of like 25, 50, 100, or 200 most visited URLs on your site and just evaluating those, you know, in between your manual audits. Not every organization is going to have, you know, some time where they can do some lengthy period where they can like stop to do a manual accessibility review. All right. So first, as I said, your first, you know, components is going to be common issues. Next, we have navigation header. And this kind of covers what I was showing earlier. And look at this. It says, so we have a link here to ARC's knowledge base. If you're an ARC user, it says expandable, collapsible disclosure widgets, ARC's knowledge base. And so I'm going to actually control and open this. Yes, Microsoft. Oh, I got to use it in Word. Apologies. Or not Word, but Chrome. Yes. But I do admire Microsoft for trying to draw me to Edge. Okay, so here's an example of a resource within our knowledge base on how to create expandable, collapsible widgets. And you see the resource here contains functional code examples as well as expected behaviors. And again, this just helps testers be sure of like, oh, okay, now I see it has to have an ARIA expanded attribute. I wasn't aware of that. Okay. Or alternatively, you can use the ARIA authoring practices guide. And you see this is also valid. This provides information about, you know, that's open source, right? So you don't need an ARC subscription. So you can go through their authoring practice guides and add them as you find things, you know, kind of like that. Or you find out components which have that design pattern. Now, some screenshot best practices. Try to have one big screenshot showing the component's entirety. If it's too big or long to fit in a single screenshot, just feel free to show just the top or initial part of it. Don't feel that you need to provide a lot of screenshots of each individual component. Again, like use common sense. Like if something is obvious, you don't need to provide a lot of screenshots about it. Now, for responsive sites, I will say, like, personally, I think there's no need to show screenshots at different breakpoints. If the sample at different screen sizes is simply to like restack or shuffle content. But if something changes content functionally, like e.g. like the navigation bar becomes a hamburger menu, then that warrants a separate screenshot. And then we have some information about like one thing I like to do with screenshots is I always like to put a border around them because, you know, especially like when it has like a white background, it just makes it more clear about what is the component. And you see here now for O3 navigation mobile, right? So I've created a separate component for the mobile layout because it's so different. All right. So that's the test plan template. If you're interested in a coaching session, you know, kind of like setting up testing for your site, feel free to reach out. You know, this is an activity I do a lot with folks of like walking through their site and doing this kind of like level of scoping. And this facilitates manual and automated testing. This document gets you buy-in from your organization. And it gets you thinking about what exactly is on your website. Moving on, let's review the manual accessibility review spreadsheet. So again, ARC Capture is the best way to perform accessibility testing. That's what we're going to cover in next month's webinar, which is how to perform accessibility testing. And that one will be much more like, I think, really like testing engineer focused. You know, this one I think is for product owners and that kind of folks more so. But nonetheless, if you are not an ARC user, one option is to use this spreadsheet. So I want to talk about it quickly. So you'll notice here is that our components here align with the components in our test plan. And what's really cool is this spreadsheet has a lot of formulas connecting to different forms here. So like, let's say our first component, it's not navigation, right? It was navigation header. So I'm going to change that. And then now look, it changes it on the WCAG 2.1 level A worksheet, as well as in the WCAG 2.1 level AA. And you see for each accessibility guideline, we have a description of the guideline. Now, and you notice that here in the spreadsheet, well, before you use it, I recommend checking, not more than recommend, I command you to look at the instructions worksheet. So here it has information on how to actually use this workbook. As I said, there's a lot of formulas connecting to different worksheets. For example, for all, the WCAG level A and level AA worksheets, all table cells must begin with the phrase pass, fail, or NA. And to clarify, you don't use quotes. And that's important because that's what gives us these numbers on the front slide on the cover page. Next, we have links here to all of the manual testing procedures within ARC. So I could, open, let's say, what is it? Images of text. And it's going to open in Edge. So I'm going to close this. Sorry to jump around, everybody. And you see here, we have our manual testing procedures for images of text. And first we explain the significance, and then we provide steps on how to do this testing procedure. And what constitutes a pass, what constitutes a fail. Now, W3C, for their WCAG success criteria, provides advisory techniques and how to understand this WCAG success criteria document, which is somewhat similar, right? Like it provides information on how to test that success criteria. But remember, WCAG is a legal and governmental document. So it's going to be written in kind of, jargon. It's bureaucratic, if you will. The knowledge base here, these WCAG testing procedures, they're written in more understandable language. And they're focused on actual tools available to you within ARC. Obviously, W3C can't make those kinds of recommendations. They're a neutral, arbiter of accessibility. And thank goodness for that, right? So, all right. So again, we'll be sharing with you after this with the slides, links to the webinars focused on the individual accessibility topic areas, images, keyboard focus, all those, the test plan template, and the manual accessibility review spreadsheet. And then your job is, start planning out your accessibility program, and feel free to reach out for support. I'm happy to have small coaching calls where we can kind of start that work of creating a testing plan. And I want to say here that I think everybody on this call knows this already, but accessibility doesn't happen by accident. Accessible is not the default. Accessibility requires organization, commitment, and a level of effort from your organization and leadership, like all of you are doing just by being here today. So accessibility is really your impact, is your opportunity to seize, to make an impact on your organization. Whether your organization has done it now or in the past. So I'm happy to support that. So now with that said, I'm going to check the chat and the Q&A. Bring on any questions. I don't think we had many. But we can also go off script. I'm interested to hear people's thoughts about accessibility programs or ARC or otherwise. All right, so I see one question here. It says, your grouping of related guidelines seems similar to how 508 Trusted Tester does it. Is that your experience? Hey, I'm not a 508 Trusted Tester. Should I do that? Any thoughts from people? Hey, if we have trusted testers in the chat, share your experience. I'd be curious what people have to say. Honestly, I learned from the audience here. But yes, I would imagine they're similar, right? Like accessibility, a lot of people are, these same ideas are kind of swirling around, right? And I think trusted tester is, again, a program focused on more people being able to do the testing. Alice says, can you use Arc with a WordPress site? Absolutely. Yes. I mean, Arc monitoring, you can just simply provide it a list of URLs and it can evaluate them. Also with Arc, we have authentication flows. I am going to actually move to Arc here. Whoops. So 1 second, I'm going to stop sharing for 1 sec. Yes, you can use Arc with a WordPress site. Yeah, because of course, like WordPress at the end of the day, it's just HTML. So, and one nice thing about Arc is you can also evaluate authenticated content. That is like content beyond a login. So in an automated manner. So here I'm selecting settings I'm logged into Arc. This is the platform where we set up monitoring, not the provider or capture. So when I see analytics here, we can select authentication flows. And here we use NPR. We just have evaluate NPR site. And we see that we have a script here which Arc monitoring performs before conducting its scan to like log into the NPR site. So, if your WordPress site has like, let's say it's e-commerce and somebody has to have an account in order to like purchase an item. Well, then therefore we can test that content with Arc in an automated manner. Now, let me see. Any other, I don't see. Oh, we got a new QA question. Or I'm sorry, a new question. It says, oh, I was responding in chat instead of QA. I am a trusted tester. The exam is a nightmare. It needs a lot of QA, but the ICT testing baseline and process overall are useful. That's great advice, Sherry. Thank you for sharing. I'm not sure because like the thing is when it comes to certifications, right? Like I think that I'm a big supporter of accessibility certifications because, I think accessibility is a little bit like info security, that if you're doing a good job, like you shouldn't hear anything. So therefore it can be hard to like demonstrate your experience in accessibility. So certification helps do that. And moreover, we're in a global economy. So if you're doing business with somebody that's in, some other country, you don't know them. Like, however, since they have the certification, you can be sure that they have some knowledge. So I really think of those accessibility certifications helps advance accessibility. I'm a big supporter of them. And I think collectively as an accessibility community, we should support them. If those exams need QA, let's provide that. So now the ICT testing baseline, which Sherry mentions. So Arc rules our automated rules are, how to say this, designed to conform with ICT. That is, ICT provides a standard that basically like automated accessibility tests should reach like certain outcomes, like all of the accessibility rules engines should agree upon certain results. So we're a part of that. And I think that's very good because again, like I think it's critical that accessibility is seen as objective for its credibility. It can't be seen as something that's like, well, this tester said that, and then some other tester maybe would have a different. No, that doesn't fly in a legal setting. Next, it seems obvious that keyboard accessibility typically wouldn't apply to mobile devices, if at all. However, color contrast would. In your experience, are there certain guidelines that consistently fall in the middle, sometimes applying to mobile devices and sometimes not? If so, do any immediately come to mind? That's an excellent question. That's really a thoughtful question, Benjamin. I like that. So for the record, keyboard accessibility does apply to mobile devices because some people with their mobile devices use things like switch interfaces where they press a button, to say like, to move around the site and say basically like yes or no on an element, kind of like tabbing versus pressing enter. And that's very analogous to keyboard accessibility. However, I will say a lot of those people I feel like increasingly use like voice control, but whatever. So keyboard accessibility does have benefit, and just supporting the keyboard is kind of like the most basic elements of accessibility. So supporting that really helps support a lot of other assistive technologies. Now, however, but I get what you're saying though, is that that keyboard accessibility is a little bit different in the sense for, well, actually, you know what? And I think actually keyboard accessibility is even more important to test sometimes for mobile devices, especially because I see a lot of like hover interactions and things like that, and you can't trigger those obviously using the, touch interface. Now I see some comments in chat here. Okay, I see some of them are this. So
there is one, Aaron.
I'm looking
How
here.
about how to test emerging technology?
Can we get a certificate of attendance? Michelle, that's a good question. Honestly, can I get that?
I actually answered that question.
Yeah, I'd like one too. So I find the planning of the test very interesting, and even more so, or offering an associated resource in order to solve the noncompliance. Currently, I receive a nonconformity document, but they only tell me the standard does not comply. They do not offer resources or examples. See, that bugs me, and I think that's one of the best things about ARC is that each issue is mapped to specific resources from our knowledge base. And, the benefit there, again, like I think a lot of people on this call are probably like very experienced in terms of accessibility. And I feel like automated accessibility gets a bad rap amongst the accessibility community because they like to point out, which is true, that only through manual testing can you cover all WCAG success criteria. But here's the benefit to automated testing, and it directly applies to Ohana's. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name. I apologize very much. Point here, which is that automated testing raises code level issues, which generally, they are code level. So they're simplistic enough that a computer can detect them. So those issues can be solved without changing the visual appearance and perhaps with minimal engineering. So therefore, that automated testing empowers designers and developers to independently solve common issues while growing their understanding of accessibility over time. And eventually they graduate to the boss level of like working on like drag and drop feet interfaces and things like that, right? So, but again, it really is important to provide those resources. Something I say a lot is you cannot automate something you do not understand. Moving on. Elizabeth McCready, I am part of a web accessibility certificate study group for CPAC. That's the Certified Professional something in accessibility competence. And the web accessibility specialist. I used to have that. It expired. I want to get that back. I apologize. So I would be happy to share the GitHub link and how to get people involved if people are interested. Hey, Elizabeth, great that you are doing that. Thanks. You are doing a service for the community. We all work for the web. Keyboard accessibility with things like semantic heading levels and landmarks applies to mobile. Very much so. Very much the case. I agree. How about how to test emerging technologies like VR? This same tool works. Hey, yes. I mean, I think one thing that is underestimated about WCAG, kind of like our US Constitution, is that when they created WCAG, they understood that new web technologies were going to emerge that they could not even predict. So WCAG is written general enough to apply to all types of emerging technologies like VR. With that said, VR is generally in a format which cannot be scanned in an automated manner. It's very much a manual testing review, right? And VR is something that, again, like, as I said, like you're applying those guidelines. So it's going to require kind of, I think, more accessibility experience, right? Like, and it's about developing an accessibility mindset. Any tips on charts having accessibility? That'll be my last question here. I'll let everybody go then. So charts having accessibility, we have a lot of resources within our knowledge base on chart accessibility. With that, I will say, ensure that content within the chart can be reached using the keyboard alone. And I think in general, when we talk about like D3.js or, one of these like Tableau or whatever, these like complex charting libraries, a lot of times I think you have limited control over the code base. Do not attempt to change the actual infographic or chart. Instead, provide the information in a accessible HTML data table. So 1 second, I'll show an example real quickly done by the iconic Steve Faulkner. So Steve Faulkner did an example, and you can find this online yourself. Whoops. I don't know why I have like DevTools open. That's so weird. So here we see, look at this, is that this is a very complex table. And you see that within HighCharts, it's built-in functionality that it allows you the ability to download it as an HTML data table. So again, like it's very difficult to make things like charts and lines and all that kind of stuff like accessible. The other thing is when you look at a chart like this, notice that they are not relying on color alone to distinguish between the different lines. They're also using dots and other textures. So again, then that doesn't require the ability to discern color, right? So, but anyways, charts is a great topic. You can add me on LinkedIn. We can kind of like talk further about it. So with that said, we're at the end of the hour. Okay, we have one last question I want to deal with.
We had actually 2 more in the chat.
Okay, then I will stay for another moment or two to answer these. They're good questions. I noticed this. Meg Lamont, thank you. Are you planning on making a mobile app to test on mobile devices? We are, but I didn't say that. So, next, can automation accessibility testing be a helper for a beginner in that field? I am a beginner in QA and I combine manual and automated tools, but I don't know if it's a good resource to learn from. Absolutely. I think that's, again, the great benefit to automated accessibility is that it makes you aware of an issue, and in the course of fixing it, and again, like I think this is something really important about ARC, is that in ARC, and this is why I called my webinar series Understand, Test, Solve, is in here, I'm going to move quickly through this. I'm sorry for all the clicking and clacking and all this, but I want to show an example here for our friend. Is, let's say input has no accessible name. So I called it Understand, Test, Solve because when you find the issue, and here we have the actual code snippets. Here we have a description of the rule. And then your first step in understanding, and this is how you use automated accessibility, okay? Is first, so it's a 4.12 issue, input has no accessible name. First step is to understand the guideline. Before you even interact with the code, understand the actual guideline. So name, role, value. So all interface components, that means interactive components, must have a name, a role, and a value, its current state, okay? And you want to go down the rabbit hole, you can read further on about that. The next, when you have the actual code, then perform our manual testing procedure on the element that was flagged by automated testing. And again, so this helps you be, for one, verify it's a legitimate issue, 2, gauge the impact on user experience, and detect other accessibility issues which can't be detected via automated means alone. So again, like it says input has no accessible name. Okay. Well, then when you inspect on that element, you can see, hey, does it have a visual label or does it rely on a placeholder for its name, right? And that would be an accessibility issue. And then lastly, so we've identified the input has no accessible name. Then we have our resources here from the Accessible Web Content Development module on how to solve that issue. So we could use the ARIA label, or we could actually use the input label association. And you see, again, like you're taking on smaller, kind of simpler to solve issues while growing your understanding of accessibility. You don't know what an accessible name is now? Hey, neither did I when I started. So again, like this is just such a natural process of learning, and you do it while incrementally improving your site. So, all right, great, everybody.
Great.
Back to you, Stephanie.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Aaron. This has gone long and still we have 78 people on the webinar, so it's fantastic. Thanks everyone for attending the webinar today. Again, if you have any questions or you need additional information, you can reach out to us at ida@tpgi.com. And part 2 of Aaron's webinar will be Tuesday, December 12th. So mark your calendars and we'll be sending a reminder through our email service as well. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great day, evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye.